wait, before you buy those shorts, you need to watch this video. I'm Vanessa with Ellie and Mac, and I'm going to be showing you a cute alternative to this year's trendy shorts. We're going to be taking Ellie and Mac's paper bag pattern, and I'm going to be making it 5 different ways. I'm going to be showing you all sorts of hacks, and I'm going to be using all different types of fabric. I used vintage gingham, quilting cotton, and for you serger lovers, I used a knit. Let me show you all the details on how to make these 5 adorable skirts for summer. If you've been watching me for any time, you know I have an aversion to shorts. And you know I wear shorts because Jessica, also here on this channel, does not like seeing me sweating during the summer. So I've had to invest in them over the years. And I swear, every time I wear shorts, I'm like, yes. And then I see pictures of me in the shorts. And I feel like it's watching a video of me running. I'm like, really? That's what I look like in those shorts. So I decided a long time ago to lean into dresses and lean into skirts, and the paper bag pattern is one of my favorites. Now, I'm using this pattern, and we would love for you to support here at Ellie and Mac. But if you happen to have a pull-on elastic waist skirt, you can definitely use some of these hacks I'm going to be showing you today. But this is a great pattern. So let's start off with the shorts. These are the baggy wide leg shorts that everyone's wearing this season. And I'm going to be honest, I've already done gauchos, and I'm not going back with baggy shorts ever again. So I wanted to take on this trend of not only the shorts, but the denim skirts. And I whipped out some vintage denim, and this skirt turned out so well. I actually sent a picture to my sister-in-law going, take that, Old Navy. I made the cutest denim skirt. So let me show you how to get the most out of your denim and make this adorable skirt.
I barely had enough fabric. I had so little fabric that I am having to put an extra seam in the pocket. I used mesh interfacing, but I was just very excited to use this vintage denim. It feels like it's probably from the 70s, and I'm so excited. This is all that I had left. It's just ribbons of fabric after I got done cutting. And so it was very exciting to finally use this up, and that seam just kind of melted away. It's those happy seams that we talk about. Now we're going to be adding on this pocket. Now, these pockets I love. They look so nice, but they also have a nice depth to them, but they don't add bulk, which is amazing. So I'm doing a 3/8 seam allowance here, and this denim is just working perfect. So once I sew it, I do take it over to my serger to make sure that those ends do not fray. Now I want my thread to stand out, so I'm actually sticking with the gray thread. I love all the details in jean skirts, and so I want to bring this in with this very unique paper bag version of it. So I'm just doing a 1/8 seam allowance on the edge of this pocket, but I'm using all the details that you normally would with any jeans, whether it's pants or a skirt. Once I have that detail on, then you can add on the side of your pocket. And this is just the same, where we're going to sew it with a 3/8 seam allowance and then take it to the serger. And to get the best results, I actually like to baste right here. So I'm going to be basting the pocket onto that side seam, and then I'm going to be also basting at the top. Now, as you may notice, my fabric does have some wrinkle to it. Now, this fabric has been sitting a long time. I have washed and ironed it when it got back into my stash, but for the last 3 years, it has been sitting there. And no matter how many times I iron it just stays until it's about done. And then I noticed that the wrinkles have finally came out after continuously ironing as I sew. But this is basting along the top and side edges while line up my back skirt to my front skirt. So after I have that sewed, here's the waistband. So I've attached it already, and now this is where I veer from the instructions. The instructions say to add the elastic and then add the waistband, but I actually like to add the waistband first. And then here, because I want the detail, before I add the elastic, I'm going to actually top stitch it down. This is going to continue to give me those details. And sometimes with the elastic, it's just hard to make sure that everything looks straight. And sometimes you get those little tucks. So I want to avoid all that, but I still want all the detail. Then I marked how thick my elastic was. And I have this a little bit wider than my elastic, but I still want it to be pretty tight. So I marked it with chalk, and then once I have it figured out how deep I need it, I'm using that edge, and you can see I'm at about 1.5 inches from the side. That's going to give me that 1 inch casing for my elastic. Now, because this is the top of the casing, I can actually go all the way around and I don't need to leave that opening. So here's what that stitch along the top looks like, and you can see it right here. Now, this elastic, I probably put this elastic in 4 times, and I actually figured out a trick. So I'll show you with that with the next skirt. But once I get the elastic in, now it's time for me to go back to that little opening. So I'm going to line up my seams with my sewing machine, take it over to my serger, and I'm going to serge that small edge. And then I can flip it back down, and I can just add that little bit of top stitching. So you do have to go back and finish that, but at least you don't have the elastic in the way while you're trying to add some of these very important straight details. Now, to prevent my elastic from rolling or having any other issues, I'm actually going to sew down the center of the elastic. I love this detail. It really does keep the elastic right where I want it, and I have no fear putting it on. Now here we are at the belt loops, and again, this is another great way to add those jean skirt details. So I just am sewing this binded piece of denim, and I'm doing a 1/8 seam allowance on the edge. This is part of the pattern. What I love about this is this one continuous piece. And so you're not doing small little pieces and trying to make them all look the same for the belt loops. You do one continuous piece, and then that piece you cut into the individual belt loops to make sure that all of them have the same uniform look to them. So that's really cool with this. I really love having a little belt loop. What makes these belt loops so great is that you can either add your own belt or you can make one with the pattern. So you do have the option to make your own tie belt, but I wanted to add my own just for this look. So here we're going to be adding them, and I like to add these belt loops 2 inches from the outside of the pockets. And I've noticed that if I open it up and I sew down where it's the thickest, and I'm sewing right where I did the top stitching for the waistband, so it was really thick there. So I sew down there, and then I only fold over the top. I have a much easier time going over this bulky piece of fabric. And I do try to tuck in quite a bit, because if you're going off the edge, I've noticed that sometimes that does run into difficulties. So this is the best way that I have found in order to add those belt loops without too much issue. Now, instead of hemming, I wanted to have a little fun, because I do love the look of the frayed edge. And so I just have a 1/4 seam allowance, and I'm just going to sew my gray stitch all the way around, and then I can take it back and start to unpick and start to fray those edges. So it's just one more added detail that you can add to your skirt. And what do you think of my vintage denim skirt? I did very little to change the pattern with this first hack. I just think that this pattern is so perfect, and it fits absolutely lovely. It gives a little more detail than what you normally see with a jean skirt. I love that I can change out the belts, and there's just a little extra versatility there. And these pockets are absolutely glorious. Now, that little frayed hem is just a little extra detail, and with every wash, it's going to be even better. What do you think of the first skirt?
So, up next, one of my favorite ways to save money is using quilting cotton, and this pattern is perfect for it. This trend that I love right now is just this kind of Regency era beautiful florals. And I wanted to use this particular pattern because it had stripes. So with this skirt, I'm going to show you how to add details using striped fabrics different ways, and we're going to take on the Regency trend, because who doesn't want to feel like a princess?
Horizontal fabric, there are so many options to add great detail. Here you can see that I went vertical with the pockets as well as the waistband. And talking about the waistband with quilting cotton, you absolutely need the interfacing. I didn't use it on the thick denim, but I definitely used it here to make sure that that paper bag top absolutely stood up and gave that beautiful effect that I was looking for. So this is what my skirt is going to look like. And first I need to add those pockets. You can see how I lined up my horizontal fabric inside my pocket. Not that anyone's going to see it. And I used this lovely mint green thread that I thought would add a little extra detail to all my stitches. Now here's the pockets added on, as you can see on the inside and the back. And now it's going to be at time to add my back. Now once it's added, we're going to just slip on this band. Now I slipped it on the first time and I realized that the beautiful floral detail would actually be on the inside. So make sure you just look at both sides and figure out which side you like the best. Now what I love is that this actually gave me a 1-inch thick elastic space that I could easily add. Now, here's the trick to getting your elastic through when you're using interfacing or thick thread. If you make your elastic 1 inch longer and then you sew it in half and then you add tape around the safety pin so it doesn't come undone, the thickness of elastic will help it from folding over. I probably redid the elastic on the first denim skirt like 4 times because the elastic kept folding and I could not correct it. But out of desperation, I figured out just to sew that little bit will help hold it straight, especially because I like my waist, the elastic bands to actually be pretty tight. And then I went across just like before and added a stitch around the edge and then did a 1-inch hem along the bottom. And this one, because it's not really flowy and the gather's not too big, I have no problem just hemming it up 1 inch. Normally I like to do a rolled hem because I don't want anyone to see that serged line, but this worked perfectly and the end result with this skirt is just absolutely lovely. I think cotton breathes so well in the summer, and it does not look like quilter's cotton. I think that this is just a lovely addition to my skirts, and it works perfectly with this applique top that I made last week. Now, I didn't add a belt on this either because I let the fabric speak for itself, and it's so adorable around the waistband. I just absolutely love it.
I know I'm not the only gingham lover here. I just love it. I find it adorable, and I know that all of us have a secret stash of that beautiful squares. The trend that I'm trying to take on is those gingham little shorts. You know the ones, they're the little bloomers, and they look so cute if you're 20. But I'm a 40-year-old mom, and I'm scared it's going to make me look like I'm wearing a diaper. So I wanted to take on this trend, but do it in a skirt. And also, I wanted it to be adorable, just like those bloomers. So I added a ruffle. Now, the fun thing about this is we are going to fake it before we make it with shirring. So I'm going to show you how to do all that in the next skirt.
As you know, gingham is pretty thin, so I laid my piece of interfacing on this fabric before I started cutting it. This is just a nice little hack for me to be able to just take it right to my iron and have everything cut perfectly, and you're cutting 2 in 1. So once I cut the front waistband, I'm going to cut the back. Now, this skirt, I actually cut at the mid-thigh cut line. So I'm going to line up my fabric at the mid-thigh, and I'm just going to measure it and see how long it is so I know how wide to make my ruffle. So it's about 11 inches at the mid-thigh for my size. So I decided it'd be easier to put my fabric on fold and then cut 2 strips 16 inches wide on fold. Because the pattern's cut on fold, this will give me a 32-inch ruffle to 22 inches, and that'll be a perfect amount. I feel like anything past a 1.5 at 6 inches long, you run the risk of sitting down and having that ruffle flip up or the wind catching it. So I do like the 1.5 ratio when I'm dealing with a ruffle that's this thin. Now here I decided that I wanted to add a cute little ties to the front of this because bows are in as well, and so I thought this was the perfect opportunity to take a moment and add some adorable ties. I cut one strip 24 inches long, 2 inches wide to make the binding to make the front tie on the top front of my skirt. Now, here's where things get a little different. Instead of doing a 1-inch elastic, I decided to do a 2-inch elastic because I want to be able to add that shirring detail. And so I'm going to be able to get more rows of stitches if I do the 2 inches. So again, here I'm just chalking in about how thick the elastic is. Now I try to make it a little bit bigger than the chalk mark so everything runs smoothly. But as you can see, I'm going to be adding that 2-inch elastic in the casing that I just sewed after I marked it with chalk. And again, I'm using that little hack to get that elastic through. Now you can see how adorable that tiny little paper bag detail at the top is, and then how nice that elastic looks. Now I'm just lining up each stitch line with the edge of my serger. It's about 1/2 between each row because it's a 2-inch elastic, and I have 4 rows here. And then once I have it all nice and stitched, I just took it back over to my ironing board and I steamed it, and it helped get those stitches even closer by just getting that elastic rewarmed. And so you can see how nice that looks here. Now here I'm just going to be adding a gather stitch on my ruffle, and I like to add this gather stitch. I think this is about a 3.5 instead of the whole 5. I like to have my gathers nice and close together, and then once I get them gathered, then I take them to my iron and I just iron them up. This prevents any of those gathers from tucking under and creating a little hole at the bottom of your skirt. That is definitely not something we want, and we want to have these gathers stay in place as we're sewing. And with thinner fabric, sometimes they slip, so taking it to the iron is a really helpful tip here. And then I'm just going to add the gather to the bottom of the skirt and clip it in. And then once I have it clipped in, it just goes really fast from here. All we have to do is sew it on, and then I can serge it. So you don't want to leave these raw edges here. And so if you're doing this without a sewing machine, you can do a cast over stitch instead of just doing a straight stitch to add them. But this will definitely be a place that gathers. You can see a lot of the strings already happening here. And once I add that gather on, all we have to do is a rolled hem. Now I do prefer to have the rolled hem here just because this will kind of flip up as you walk, and you want to not have those serges showing. At least I don't. But I know if you have a cover stitcher, you want to have that store-bought look, and so definitely don't be afraid to use it here. This is just a preference thing for me. Whenever I have a skirt this length, I always just do a rolled hem at the bottom to make sure that everything's tucked in. Now I use my serger along the edges so that way I can fill that serger. That's 1/4, and once I roll it up, then it has the perfect 1/2 inch that's rolled into that rolled hem. So I just really love the look of this. I think it's just the perfect detail at the bottom of this skirt. Now, as you can see, I have my binding already ironed in, and I actually like to start my stitch first because it's a little easier to go off of it than to go on it when I begin one of these binding. And then you can see I'm just going to fold in the inside, and then I just sewed that on to the front of my skirt. And here you can see that adorable gather along the back. And then, yeah, my bow's a little crooked, but I can always retie that. But I love how this looks. That shirring feels so comfortable along my waist, and it looks so adorable up close. It's definitely a quick way to get the look without having to hand wind your bobbin in order to use the shirring. Plus, I feel like this holds a little bit more steady. Now let's take a closer look at that gather with the rolled hem. And this is just a fun little cutesy detail that I just love.
We've taken this paper bag pattern through day wear to adorableness. Now let's bring it into evening wear. And the cool thing about this is made with poplin, black poplin, which I think I got it for $3 a yard. So very affordable. And then I added a little lace detail. This is such a great way to elevate a cotton. And I have to say, this skirt, I put it on and it felt absolutely breezy because that poplin fabric just is perfect for summer, even in black. So let me show you how this classy skirt turned out.
So this is the fourth skirt, and you've seen a lot of these. So here I'm just going to show you how to add the lace. I have my skirt opened wide. I've already added the pockets, and I've only sewed up one side seam. Now here's my lace. It's a mesh with floral and polka dots, and it has this zigzag cut on the edge to prevent fraying. And I'm sewing it onto the bottom of my skirt with a 3/8 seam allowance all the way across. Now you can see when I get done sewing it, this is not what I want my end result to be. So I have sewed it on and I've serged it at this point. And now I'm going to close up that side seam. And then I can just use my scissors to cut off the extra. I think just doing the stitches on the edge instead of serging it will help hide that seam a little better. And that's why I only try to do one. Now it's time to top stitch that serge up. So we're going to be just tucking up that serge, and then we're just going to be sewing along the edge. And this one I'm trying to keep it about a 1/4 inch just to hold that up. I'm just on the edge of this serge. And here is my finished skirt. Now the original pattern has the waistband cut at 6 inches, but for this skirt I only cut it at 4. I used a 1-inch elastic, and you can see I did a little bit of that shirring effect. I didn't add any interfacing to this because I wanted just that little light paper bag. And this is so sheer. I absolutely love it. It's almost just like a veil for my knees. And I was a little scared it would look like it was coming in, but once I put it on, all my worries were eased. Now let's take one more look at that adorable waistband with that small little paper bag. That is what a 4-inch elastic does.
Okay, with all these skirts, I love a good knee length. But is it really summer without a floral maxi? I've been seeing so many floral maxis with jean jackets on. I had to take this trend on. And I do love a good maxi. I'm sorry. It is one of my favorite things in this world is pulling on a maxi and wearing flats. But I also wanted to give those who love their serger a chance to use it extra here. So we're going to use a knit fabric, and I'm going to show you how to get that cute smaller paper bag detail.
So this is my last skirt, and I wanted to go out with a bang, and there's just nothing better than a maxi skirt. So we're going to lengthen this. So instead of to knee length, I actually lengthened this skirt 39 inches. I held my measuring tape to my waist, and I let it fall to the ground, and that gave me 39 inches for my 5'5" frame. So I used my whole cutting mat, which is 36 inches, and then I used another cutting mat to have those extra 3 inches added to the top of the waist. Now, once I have the maxi cut, you can see I was even angling it out a little bit just to make sure I could walk. Now, I'm using the same detail that I used on the black skirt. I'm only going to cut the waistband 4 inches long with a 3/8 seam allowance, and with a 1-inch elastic. It's only giving me a 1/2 inch paper bag, and that is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm not going to interface, and so I don't want a big paper bag because it will just flop down or all over the place. So this is a great way if you don't want to add interfacing, just to shorten that to just a 1/2 inch. We'll make sure that it still sits correctly, and then just adds a cute little ruffle up at the top. So I did this both on the front and the back. So I've completed this skirt, and I've understitched the pockets right here, and I've used my serger to close up the seams. And I ruled hemmed the bottom. Now with using the serger, it does mean that instead of having the 3/8 seam allowance, you're to a 1/4, but I wanted the extra space with this maxi. I just think that that's just beautiful. And here is my smaller waistband. So just like before, I'm just going to clip it on. I'm going to make sure that those sides line up perfectly. And then I'm going to take it over to my serger, leaving an opening so I can add the 1-inch elastic. Here I've had it serged on, and I'm just going to add that 1-inch elastic so I can make sure that I'm at the right spot with my sewing machine. So I mark it with chalk like I did with the rest of them. And again, this is about a 1/2 inch paper bag that I'm sewing all the way around the skirt. And I'm using a lightning stitch at a 5mm to accomplish this. It gives it more of a straight stitch. And with this, as you know, you can go all the way around because there's no elastic that's going to be coming into this area. And then I wanted to give a little crinkle in the middle of this skirt. So I actually did a wide zigzag. And I just like this. It just gives it a little extra little crunch along the waistband, and I think it looks absolutely adorable. Because I have so many skirts with the same pattern, trying to add little details to each one so they all look unique has been really fun. This is the whole point of one pattern with 5 hacks. And this skirt, oh my goodness, it is so comfortable and just absolutely beautiful. I love that I can just tuck in a basic tank top, throw a jean jacket on, and I feel nice and put together. And let's get a little closer look at that adorable waistband. You can see that little zigzag just adds a little extra detail. And I love that this is a knit skirt with pockets. All of these have glorious pockets.
Okay, let's do a rundown of things that we've learned in this video. If you want to do a wider paper bag, always use interfacing. If you want to have it a little bit smaller and more of a shirring effect, you don't have to use interfacing, but you want to change the depth of that waistband. And I think both of those tips gave me such a wide diversity in skirts. Now, you can always add embellishments like lace, or you can make it a maxi. You can also have so many hemming options. From rolled hem, you can do a frayed edge, as well as just bringing it up 1 inch. There are so many versatile ways to take these patterns and make them yours. You can add the belt loops. If you'd like to add a tie, you can, or you can just bring your regular belt to this. I hope you learned so many tips and tricks to get the most out of your pull-on elastic skirt. And make sure you go to Ellie and Mac and get this pattern, because I have to say it's really awesome. Thank you so much for watching. Your support last week was just amazing. I'm hoping you're enjoying these videos of taking the pattern and going beyond. Thank you so much for watching. A like would be great. If you would like to hit the bell so you know when we have new videos here at Ellie and Mac, that would also be amazing. We wish you happy sewing and catch you next time.